this video, we are going to be looking at everything you need to know for tracing your patterns and cutting it out. So let's start with the elephant head. You would have joined this one on the solid line and used some sticky tape to just keep that in place so that you have this complete head that you're going to start tracing. So let's start off with our tracing our patterns. I'm just going to pin this in place. You can do some planning and arrange your patterns on your piece of fabric to see how you can get the most out of it. The elephant leg, we want to place this on a fold. For the elephant ears, we are going to cut a mirror image of this fabric, and then we're going to use a contrast fabric for the inside of the ears. So I'm not going to cut it double, I'm just going to cut on the one piece of the fabric, then I'm going to create my mirror image, flip it over, trace it here, and then cut it out. Okay, so let's start tracing. Just make sure that everything is lying nice and flat. I prefer to trace and then cut out, and it's just much easier than trying to cut around the pattern. You will see I'm not adding any seam allowances to any of these patterns because everything is already included. For some we're going to stitch on the trace line, others we're going to cut out on the trace line. So just check your instructions where we will be explaining that in detail. So this one, I'm just going to do the mirror image on this side. Okay, so now we have traced out all our patterns. You will do the same. You will do another elephant arm and another elephant leg. Okay, so now we've started to remove our pins. So as we take it off, just pin it back in place. You just want to make sure that it's staying in place so that as soon as we start cutting it, the fabric doesn't move. So what we're doing with the elephant head and the elephant body is we are going to cut around the trace line and not on top of the trace line, so that when we sew it, we can sew directly onto the trace line, and that way we can make sure that we have all the nice perfect roundings of our elephant head. The same with the elephant body. If we sew directly onto the trace line, we make sure that our body is symmetrical on this side and on that side. So let's start with this. I'm cutting around the trace line. We'll cut out the dot just now. Just get this. You can always trim this a bit after you've sewn it. You can even decide to cut this out afterwards. Okay, so what I do with the darts, I encourage you not to remove your pins after you've cut this out. So what we're going to do with the darts, I'm going to cut this directly onto the trace line. I just want to make sure that it stays nice in place. So I'm going to keep the pins in until I've sewn this entire thing together. Okay, so there's our elephant head. We're going to do the same with the body. We're going to cut around the trace line. You can cut about 1 centimeter at the top. Okay, so we're going to cut into the dot directly on the trace line again. Once again, keep your pins in place. Okay, so that one is done. For the rest of the doll body, what we're going to do, we're literally going to cut directly onto the trace line. For the leg, the foot, the arm, and the ears. So it's just for the elephant head and the elephant body that we cut around the trace line, because we're going to sew directly onto the trace line. You would have now already drawn your other arm so that you don't waste fabric. Okay, so there's our one leg. Let's do the foot piece. So there we've got 2 foot pieces already. Now we're going to do the arm. And lastly, we are going to cut out our ears. Okay, so what we basically want to do is so there we've got our one ear, and let's do our other ear. So let's just see what we have here. So here we've got our 2 ears. They're the mirror image of each other. What you would do now, you would use your contrast fabric, the fabric that you would like to use for the inside. I'm going to use a little gray, and I would then make sure that I do the same principle here. Cut 2 mirror images of each other for the inside of the ears. Okay, so we've got our ears, we've got our little arm, our foot, our leg, our body, and our head. So just to recap, make sure we're not adding any seam allowances to any of the patterns. For the body and for the head, you are tracing, cutting around the trace line because we are going to sew directly onto the trace line. For all the others pieces, we're tracing and cutting out directly onto the trace line. Okay, so the next step is what we'll do is we'll start sewing all of these patterns, all of these pieces together. For the darts, I like to keep my pins in place. I don't remove them. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put these 2 dart pieces ends onto each other. I'm going to sew those 2 pieces together, the same with this. And as soon as all of that is sewn, my fabric is still in place. And then I'm just going to follow the trace line and sew all of this together. Going to do the same for the elephant head. We are going to sew these dart pieces to each other, and then we still have our trace line that we're going to follow when we want to sew the head closed. So let's do that first.